You know what's funny about the moment your life falls apart? Sometimes you see it coming in slow motion, and sometimes it hits you like a freight train you never heard coming. My story? It was both. My billionaire husband threw me the most extravagant birthday party I'd ever seen. 500 guests, orchestra, diamonds. Then a woman walked in with 3 children who had his eyes. "Happy birthday, sweetheart," he whispered. "Meet my other family." I smiled, because I'd been planning this moment for months. Before we dive into this story, hit that subscribe button and ring the bell because you won't believe how this ends. Drop a comment telling me what you would do in this situation. Now, let me tell you how my perfect marriage became the perfect revenge. My name is Simone, and 5 years ago I thought I'd won the lottery in life. I met Lawrence at Columbia University, where I was finishing my master's in public health. He was a guest lecturer, this confident, charismatic man who owned a pharmaceutical manufacturing empire worth billions. Not the kind of guy who usually notices a graduate student buried in research papers and student debt, but he noticed me. Our romance was the kind you see in movies, private dinners overlooking Central Park, weekend trips to Paris because I mentioned I'd never seen the Eiffel Tower. He proposed on a yacht in the Mediterranean, and I said yes without hesitation. Why wouldn't I? He was attentive, generous, and he made me feel like the most important person in the world. We got married in a ceremony that cost more than most people's houses, and I moved into his Manhattan penthouse thinking I was living a fairy tale. The first few years were good, really good. I threw myself into charity work, sat on nonprofit boards, lived the life of a wealthy man's wife. Lawrence traveled constantly for business, sometimes gone for days at a time. But I understood. Building an empire takes sacrifice. Or at least, that's what I told myself every time he missed a dinner reservation or cut a vacation short for an emergency meeting. Looking back now, the signs were everywhere. I just didn't want to see them. The phone calls he'd take in another room, lowering his voice to a whisper. The weekend he claimed to have the flu, but came back Monday morning looking perfectly healthy and rested. That time I found a child's crayon drawing in his coat pocket, stick figures labeled Daddy, Me, and Mommy. He laughed it off, said a business partner's kid must have slipped it in there. I believed him because believing was easier than questioning. Then came my 33rd birthday. Lawrence announced he was throwing me the party of the century. 3 weeks of planning, every detail perfect. He rented the entire ballroom at the Plaza Hotel. 500 guests, a full orchestra. My dress alone cost $40,000, this gorgeous champagne-colored gown that made me feel like royalty. The guest list read like a who's who of New York society: business moguls, celebrities, politicians. I felt loved, cherished, special. The night of the party, I walked into that ballroom feeling like the luckiest woman alive. Crystal chandeliers sparkled overhead. Champagne flowed. Lawrence stood at the center of it all in his custom tuxedo, and when I entered, he took my hand and led me to the dance floor. The orchestra played our wedding song, and he held me close, whispering in my ear about how much he loved me, how I was his everything. 500 people watched us dance, and I remember thinking this was it. This was the moment our marriage turned a corner. He was finally present, finally making me his priority. Then the ballroom doors opened. It was 9 o'clock. Right in the middle of our dance, everyone turned to look, and I felt Lawrence's body go rigid against mine. A woman walked in. She was elegant, composed, wearing a simple black dress. Behind her were 3 children. 2 boys who looked about 8 years old, and a little girl who couldn't have been more than 4. The room went completely silent except for the orchestra, who kept playing for a few more confused bars before trailing off. I stepped back from Lawrence to get a better look, and that's when I saw it. The children had his eyes, those distinctive gray eyes with gold flecks that I'd spent 5 years staring into. They had his dimpled chin, his broad forehead. The resemblance was unmistakable, undeniable. My heart started pounding, but weirdly, I didn't panic. Everything just slowed down, like I was watching a scene in a movie where you know something terrible is about to happen, but you can't look away. The woman walked straight toward us. She didn't look angry or triumphant. She looked tired. "Lawrence," she said, her voice carrying across the silent ballroom. "The boys have a soccer game tomorrow at 10. You promised you'd be there this time." The little girl pulled away from her hand and ran to Lawrence, wrapping her arms around his leg. "Daddy, you said we could get ice cream after the game." "Daddy," she called him Daddy. 500 people heard it. Phones started coming out. Whispers erupted like wildfire. Lawrence stood there frozen, his face drained of all color, his mouth opening and closing like a fish gasping for air. I looked at him, then at the woman, then at those 3 beautiful children who clearly, obviously, undeniably belonged to my husband. And something strange happened in that moment. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. Something ice-cold settled over me, sharp and clear and focused. Lawrence grabbed my arm, stammering something about explaining, about this not being what it looked like. I pulled away calmly and said, "Then what is it, Lawrence? What exactly is this?" He begged me to come with him to a private room. The woman, Brielle, I'd learn her name was, stood there watching with an expression I couldn't quite read, pity maybe, or solidarity. I nodded and followed Lawrence out of the ballroom, leaving behind 500 shocked guests and 3 confused children. In a private suite upstairs, Lawrence fell apart. He confessed everything in a rushed, desperate flood of words. He'd married Brielle 7 years ago. She lived in Connecticut. Those were his children, yes, all 3 of them. He'd never divorced her. When he married me, he'd committed bigamy, which meant our marriage wasn't legally valid. For 5 years, he'd been maintaining 2 complete families in different states. His business trips were time with them. He had 2 homes, 2 lives, 2 wives who both thought they were the only one he cried. Actually cried, tears streaming down his face as he begged for forgiveness. He said he loved us both, couldn't choose, couldn't bear to hurt either of us, so he just kept the lie going. He said he'd figure it out, make it right somehow. He reached for my hands, but I pulled away. I stood there looking at this man I'd shared a bed with for 5 years, this man whose children I'd planned to have, this man who'd just revealed himself to be a complete stranger. "Give me tonight," I said, my voice surprisingly steady. "Give me tonight to process this. We'll talk tomorrow." He agreed immediately, relief flooding his face. He probably expected screaming, throwing things, a dramatic scene. My calm must have unnerved him, but he was too desperate to question it. I walked back to the ballroom alone. The party had descended into chaos. Guests huddled in groups, gossiping frantically. Brielle and the children were gone. I straightened my shoulders, lifted my chin, and addressed the room. "There's been a family emergency," I announced, my voice clear and composed. "Thank you all for coming tonight." It meant the world to me. Then I worked the room like the gracious hostess I'd been trained to be, thanking people individually for attending, accepting their concerned looks with a practiced smile. An hour later, I went home. Lawrence stayed at a hotel that night, giving me space. I didn't sleep. Instead, I sat at my laptop and started researching bigamy laws in New York. Asset protection, divorce proceedings, private investigators. I made spreadsheets. I listed every property Lawrence owned, every business holding, every account I knew about. My hands didn't shake. My mind didn't spiral. I was focused with a clarity I'd never experienced before. As the sun came up, I started remembering things I'd dismissed, that perfume on his collar that wasn't mine, the birthday cards I'd found in his office drawer, signed with different handwriting than mine, a phone conversation I'd overheard where he said, "Love you," before noticing me and quickly hanging up. The time he said he was in Chicago for a conference, but I saw a Connecticut gas station receipt in his car. I'd convinced myself I was being paranoid, insecure, a jealous wife. But my instincts had been screaming the truth, and I'd ignored them. When Lawrence came back the next morning, he looked terrible, unshaven, rumpled, exhausted. He expected to find me broken, crying, ready for a dramatic confrontation. Instead, I was dressed for business, makeup perfect, coffee in hand. "I need time," I told him. "A few weeks to think clearly about what I want." He nearly collapsed with relief. Then I added, "But I want a birthday gift. A real one, to show me you're actually sorry." He agreed immediately, desperate to do anything that might earn forgiveness. I asked for something specific, a beachfront estate he owned in the Bahamas, one of his smaller properties worth about $15 million. I framed it as needing a place to think, to heal, somewhere far from New York and the scandal. He signed it over within 48 hours, no questions asked. I also got him to transfer $2 million for renovations and expenses. His guilt made him careless. His relief that I wasn't immediately leaving made him stupid. Over the next 3 weeks, I played the role of my life, the heartbroken wife consider, reconciliation. I met with Lawrence regularly, let him hold my hand, listened to his promises to fix everything. Meanwhile, I hired a forensic accountant on the side. I hired a private investigator, and I did something Lawrence never expected. I reached out to Brielle. She was shocked to hear from me. Turned out she had no idea I existed either. She thought his constant travel was for business, just like I had. We met in secret, two women who'd been played by the same man, and we compared notes, timelines, stories, evidence. Brielle wasn't just any woman. She'd been a lawyer before having kids, and she was brilliant. Together, we started piecing together the full picture of Lawrence's deception. What we found went beyond bigamy. Lawrence had been using his double life to hide assets and evade taxes. He was creating false business expenses for his trips to see his other family, moving money through offshore accounts. There were illegal dealings in his pharmaceutical business, corners cut that endangered public safety, bribes paid to regulatory officials. His house of cards was massive, and Brielle and I held all the evidence. We formed an alliance, this woman and I who should have been enemies. We shared information, coordinated with attorneys, built an airtight case. And then we waited for the perfect moment. 4 weeks after my birthday, I told Lawrence I was ready to talk seriously about our future. He was emotional, grateful, practically weeping with relief. I suggested a private dinner at an upscale restaurant, just the two of us. He arrived with flowers, with jewelry, with promises of couples therapy and complete transparency. We ordered wine. He held my hand across the table and told me how much I meant to him. Halfway through the meal, I excused myself to the restroom. When I returned, there were 2 FBI agents standing at our table. Lawrence's face went through a series of expressions: confusion, then recognition, then that same frozen look he'd had at my birthday party. The agents were investigating him for financial fraud, tax evasion, and illegal business practices. They had evidence. Detailed, irrefutable evidence that had been provided through anonymous tips. I sat down calmly as Lawrence stammered questions at the agents. I picked up my wine glass and took a sip. Then I leaned in close to him and whispered, "Remember when you asked what I wanted for my birthday? I wanted the truth and justice. I got both." His eyes went wide as understanding dawned. "Simone, what did you do?" "Brielle and I have been working together," I said quietly. "Turns out when you betray 2 smart women, they become a very effective team. That property you signed over to me? It's safe in my name alone, untouchable. The money you transferred? Already moved to a separate account. And all those business practices you thought were hidden? We found everything, Lawrence. Every offshore account, every bribe, every corner you cut that put people's health at risk. We documented it all, and we handed it to the authorities." The color drained from his face. The agents asked him to come with them for questioning. As they led him away, he looked back at me with betrayal in his eyes. Betrayal, as if he had any right to that emotion. The next few months were a whirlwind. Federal investigation, media frenzy. Lawrence's empire crumbled under scrutiny. He faced charges that could put him in prison for years. His assets were frozen, his reputation destroyed. Brielle filed for divorce and got full custody of the children with significant child support from whatever would remain after legal fees and fines. I filed for annulment since our marriage had never been legal anyway. I walked away with the Bahamas property, the $2 million, and something more valuable than either my self-respect, my dignity, the knowledge that I hadn't crumbled or begged or accepted scraps from a man who'd betrayed me. Brielle and I still meet for coffee sometimes. We're not exactly friends, but we're bonded by survival, by the understanding that we both deserved better than what Lawrence gave us. People ask me if I'm bitter, if I'm angry. Honestly, I'm neither. I'm proud. My husband thought he could freeze me with shock on my birthday. He thought revealing his secret family in front of 500 people would break me, would make me so desperate to save face that I'd accept whatever arrangement he offered. He thought I'd be the compliant, grateful wife who'd share him just to keep the lifestyle. Instead, I did what every powerful woman should do when she's betrayed. I gathered my evidence. I built my case. I found an ally in the last person anyone would expect, and I dismantled his empire piece by piece, carefully and methodically, while he thought I was just healing from heartbreak, the best birthday gift I ever received. Watching Lawrence realize he'd catastrophically underestimated me. Watching him understand that going quiet doesn't mean you're broken. Sometimes it means you're planning. If this story taught you anything, let it be this. Never underestimate a woman who goes quiet instead of going crazy. She's not weak. She's not defeated. She's strategizing. Hit that like button if you think I did the right thing, and subscribe because I share real stories about real women who refuse to be victims. Comment below, Team Simone or Team Forgiveness. I'll be reading every single one. And remember, karma isn't always a coincidence. Sometimes it's a carefully executed plan. Sometimes the best revenge isn't moving on. It's moving forward with everything he thought you'd never have the strength to take.